Preparing before reading gives students the information they need to follow the text as you read it with general understanding. This includes three kinds of information. Firstly, enough background to the topic so they can understand key information in the text. Secondly, what the text is about in general terms. And thirdly, a step-by-step summary of what happens in the text, rephrased in common sense terms, but also using some of the key words from the text. This will allow even the weakest reader to follow as you read without struggling to work out what is going on at each step. Preparing before reading need only take about 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit of a story to you from this book here. Can you see what it's called?
Yes.
From Apartheid to Democracy. But it's a beautiful book because it's about the liberation struggle against apartheid leading up to 1994. Can anybody tell me why 1994 is important? Go on. That was the first election, the first three elections. For one person, one vote. So every adult in South Africa got to vote. Of course, there were more than one side to the struggle. Who can tell me the main party that was struggling against apartheid? ANC, is she right? Yes. But there are other groups too. Of course, does anybody recognise this man? Yes. What's his name? And what's he the leader of? IFP in Kaap, that's right. And of course, that's another side. And there was conflicts between ANC and Kaap, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The particular time we're going to look at is this one here. This is the big 1980s, so it's 1984, 1985, 1986. And this is when the next student uprising started in the townships like Saban. This little part of the textbook, this little story is about why the violence started in the townships at that time and what happened and who was involved. It starts by telling us that the rebellion started in the black townships, it blew up in the black townships, and there were two reasons for this. Because the government, on one side, they had a policy to keep the people down, to repress the people with the police and the army. And of course, this made the people very angry and frightened. Have any of you heard stories at that time of the police and the army coming to Sabatu at that time? Have you heard stories from your parents about that?
Yes.
So they had this policy on one side of keeping people down, but on the other side, they promised to make things better for the people. But then they didn't give the people enough money to actually make things better. So people expected things to get better, and they didn't. So these two things combined to make the people very frustrated. When the trouble blew up, the ANC called on all the young supporters in the townships to make it so difficult, to make so much trouble like these guys here in the townships that the government couldn't come in and control them. But there was a lot of sides to this rebellion because there were so many different people involved. So on the one hand you had the police and the army against the protesters. On the other hand you had organisations like ANC and what's the other one? IFP, and they were fighting with each other, right? Okay. And you had old people arguing with young people. And you had people who lived in townships like Sabantu and other people who lived in the squatter camps that had different ideas about what should happen. So there's a lot of sides to it. But what I'll do now is I'll read it to you, okay? And you can read along with me. You don't need to read out loud, just have a look at it as I read it. Revolutionary days. The 1984 to 1986 uprising. In the mid-1980s, South African politics erupted in a rebellion in black townships throughout the country. The government's policies of repression had bred anger and fear. The conflict was highly complex and violent. It involved not only clashes between the security forces and resistors, but violence between competing political organisations.
In the next stage, the teacher guides students to read and understand the words of the text themselves through a teacher preparing, the students identifying and marking wordings, and the teacher then elaborating on the meaning of the marked words. Preparing involves 3 cues for students to identify groups of words. Firstly, the meaning of the sentence using common sense terms. Secondly, the position of the words in the sentence, that is, where to look for them, and thirdly, the meaning of the words themselves. Students then have to identify the words from these cues. The meaning cue may be a general type of meaning such as who it's about, what they were doing, where and when. Students then have to reason from the general meaning of who, what, when or where to the particular words in the text. Or the meaning cue may be a common sense paraphrase of a technical or literary wording. Students then have to reason from the common sense meaning to the actual literate wording in the text. In each case, they are doing the work to identify and understand the words. Crucially, at this stage, preparing involves giving information to the students, not testing their knowledge. Questions are only used to engage students or to challenge them to find the words in the text. This is very different from the normal teaching practice of asking questions to monitor students' understanding. It is most important that all students are equally involved in identifying the words. In a large class, it is useful for the students to be in groups so that they can support each other and reason together about the meanings and wordings. The weakest readers should always be seated where the teacher can check and provide support as needed. It is also most important that all students are continually successful and affirmed for their success. All student responses should always be accepted and elaborated if need be, but never rejected or ignored. Once all students have identified a wording, the teacher may elaborate on its meaning by defining technical terms, by explaining new concepts or metaphors, or by asking the class for their experience or to reason about the meaning.
So what I'm going to do, kids, first of all, I'm going to tell you what each sentence is about, okay? And then I'm going to read the sentence to you. After I've read the sentence to you, I'll tell you which words I want you to find in the sentence, and then you highlight those words. Okay? Yes. Well, we'll start off with a heading. Okay? The heading's called Revolutionary Days. So, of course, it's the days when the revolution started. That's why they call it Revolutionary Days. And then it tells us when the uprising started. Now, have a look at your text, and can anybody tell us when it started? Revolutionary Days. Everybody look down your words. Revolutionary Days, what's the first year there? 1984. 1984 to when? To 1986. Okay, do that first for me, okay? And then, can you see the next word tells us is a word for rebellion. Can you see what that word is? 1984 to 1986. Uprising, that's exactly right. Let's do the whole lot, okay? 1984 to 1986 uprising. Okay.
The wordings that are marked are those that will be needed later for making notes and rewriting the text.
And you know why it's called an uprising? Because the people, what do the people do? The people rise up. Yeah, rise up. And who are they rising up against? They're rising up against the government, that's right. So it was the uprising. Now, the first sentence in the story tells us that the trouble blew up in the townships, and that the people were rebelling against the government. Okay, now I'll read that sentence to you, and I want everybody to look at the sentence that I'm reading. In the mid-1980s, South African politics erupted in a rebellion in black townships throughout the country. Okay? Now that sentence starts by telling us, so the people were rebelling, but it starts by telling us when they were rebelling. You can see the words that tell us when. Go on. Is she right? 1980s? Okay, let's all do mid-1980s. Just that one word, okay? Mid-1980s. Can you do that? That's it. Mid-1980s. Okay, that's good. That's good. Perfect. That's great, guys. Is it hard? No. It's easy, isn't it? Okay. All right. Now, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do now. I'm going to come around and I'm going to ask each table to tell me what the words are, okay? So there's one person at the table. If you can see it, you can tell me, okay? Now, that tells us that the South African politics blew up these guys here, can you see the word that tells us that South African politics blew up? South African politics erupted, is he right?
Yeah.
Can you see the word that says erupted?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that one. Erupted. The reason they use the word erupted, because that's what volcanoes do. Have you heard that before?
Yes.
A volcano erupts?
Yes.
So what were the townships like then? They were like, exactly right. They were like a volcano, and there was all this pressure inside waiting to blow up and erupt with all the anger that people were feeling about the government's repression. Okay, South African politics erupted, and then it tells us that people were rebelling. And I'm going to ask these guys again. Are you ready? Okay. South African politics, can you see the word that means people were rebelling? South African politics erupted in a rebellion, is he right? Okay, everybody did rebellion. Has everybody got that?
Yes.
A rebellion, of course, and then it tells us, these guys can help me now, then it tells us where that rebellion happened. Exactly right. Which townships did it happen in? Okay, let's all do black townships, okay? So, it happened in townships like Subantu then. So it was your parents that were involved in this, is that right? Yes. Have they told you stories about this time? Yes. Now the next sentence tells us that the reasons that you had this rebellion is because the government had a policy of keeping people down, of repressing people. And this made the people angry and frightened. So now everybody look at the sentence. I'm going to read it to you, okay? The government's policies of repression had bred anger and fear. Okay? Now, this sentence starts off by telling us which policy it was. It was a policy that repressed people. Can anybody at this table tell me what that policy was? The government's policies of repression, is that right? Yeah. Okay, repression means you're keeping people down. You're repressing them. Let's do the whole lot. Government's policies of repression. Can you do that? Yeah. Government's policies of repression. Now it's you guys' turn, okay? You ready? Because the government's policies made the people angry and frightened. And you can tell me what the words that mean that people are angry and frightened. They have bred. Okay, anger and fear, that's great. Let's all do that. You see what it says, anger and fear? The government's policies of repression. Anger and fear, you all got that? Has everybody got it?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, we're on to the next sentence. So that was one policy they had, to keep people down, to repress them. On the other side, they had a policy to try and make things better. And because they promised things would be better, people expected that things would get better, but they didn't, because the government couldn't meet their needs. Okay? Next sentence. You watching? Yes. Its policies of reform have given rise to expectations amongst black people of changes which the government had been unable to meet. Okay? So girls, it starts off by telling us the government had a policy to make things better. Can you see the word that means policies to make things better? Policies of reform, that's exactly right. Let's all do policies of reform, okay? So what's reform mean? To make things better, that's right, okay. Beautiful, beautiful, that's exactly right. Oh, well done, okay. Next. Are we still on this table here?
Yes.
All right. There's policies of reform made people expect things to get better. Who can tell me the word that means they gave rise to people expecting? What's the word that means? Expectations, is that right? Yes. Okay, let's do expectations. Expectations means they expected things to get better. And of course, it was the black people that expected things to get better, so it says expectations amongst black people, and it tells us expectations of what? Expectations of changes. That's right. Okay, let's do of changes. Just do the words of changes. Yeah. But the trouble is, and it's your guys too now, the trouble is that the government wasn't able to meet those changes. They didn't have enough money. So who wasn't able to meet the changes, to meet their needs? The government. Okay, everybody see government. Let's just do government. And then it tells us that the government couldn't meet the people's needs. So what's the word that means they couldn't meet the people's needs? The government had been unable to meet. Okay, let's do all of that. Unable to meet. Right, okay. So the government couldn't meet the changes. On the one hand, its policies of repression. Well, what did it make the people feel? Anger and fear, right?
Yes.
On the other side, what did people expect? Expectations of changes, but the government couldn't meet those expectations. Alright, the government couldn't. So the rebellion started. And when the rebellion started, all the different groups, all the parties that were fighting against apartheid came together to really make things hard for the government. And who were some of those parties that were fighting against the government? Is ANC the main one? Yeah. And IFP? And UDF? Okay, right. The various forces of resistance, which we outlined in the previous section, now combined to create a major challenge to the government. Okay? Now it starts off by telling us all the parties that were fighting against the government. And you guys can tell me, what's the words that mean all the people fighting against the government? The various forces. Exactly right. Let's all do forces of resistance. So a force is like an army. We talk about military force. Right? So the ANC was one force of resistance. UDF was another force. Forces of resistance? Exactly right. Right. And who were they resisting? Resisting against the government. And not just the government, but the government had a policy that was called, what? Apartheid, that's right. So they were resisting against apartheid. Yeah? The policy of apartheid, the policy of repression. Okay. So the various forces of resistance, which we outlined in the previous section, now came together. So these guys over this side, it's your turn. Can you tell me the word that means they now came together? Combined, yes, okay, let's do combined. So the forces of resistance combined. They came together into one mighty force to fight the government. Combined? Beautiful. That's right, guys. That's exactly right. So what's combined mean? Combined means come together, that's exactly right. All right. So they combined to make things very hard for the government. And can you guys see the words that means they combine to make things very hard? Combine to create a major challenge. Okay, let's just do major challenge. How big was the challenge? A major challenge. So when you make a challenge for somebody, you make things hard for them. On a rugby field, you challenge the other side, you make things very hard for them. So in the sports games, one side challenges the other. Alright, so this is the forces of resistance challenging the other side. The apartheid government. There's one thing I want us all to do together is read this. Okay, and the way I'll do it is I'll read the words that are not highlighted, and I want you all to read the words that you've highlighted. Okay. You ready? And we'll start with the title. You ready? Everybody watching? Revolutionary Days. That's exactly right. All right, you ready? In the South African politics, throughout the country, had bred its had given rise to amongst black people which the had been the various now to create a to the government. Okay, well done, guys.
With a large class, and a new routine, it takes time to get discussion going. However, once students are familiar with the routine and feel comfortable, access to the meanings of the text generates a high level of discussion, as the following example shows.
You can see if the army's going to move in. Can you imagine what it would be like if the army came in here with its tanks and everything? Did they come here?
They would ride to the bushes and stuff. They would hide away from the police.
Yeah.
In their days of apartheid.
Oh, we're here in Sudan.
Yeah, like they would drive around with their cars and stuff. Like if they see a person in the streets, they will lock them away and ask them why they entered school or why they're not working.
And so come in the houses and count how many in the family.
Oh, really?
When they come next time, they find someone else. That person will go to jail. If for your cousin to visit your house, you have to go to the police and write down this as a visitor. Because if they come, they lock the person up.
That the person will stay how many days and
How many days? If they come and check that maybe stay for a week, then they come back and you still here locking up. At 6 o'clock, everybody must be in the house.
Like sometimes, if you have at home, like there's like 3 boys and 1 girl, a boy that is over 18 is ordered to move out of the house and go build his own house. Like when the police come, like they ask their ages, like if Morgan is like living there and he's over 18, he has to go out and build his own house and build his stuff.
How do you feel about that?
Doesn't shit.
Once all students have control of the meaning of the text through text marking, they are ready to write up the information from it as notes. This is done by students taking to describe notes on the board as the other students tell them what to write and how to spell words from the words they have marked in the text. The students are now largely in control, with the teacher prompting and supporting with spelling patterns, pronunciation and some meanings. Now that shared knowledge of the text has been built up through detailed reading, questions can now be used to prompt students for wordings and meanings that they already know. It is essential that the students actively write on the board and not the teacher, as they were actively in control of identifying and marking words in their text copies in the last stage. With a large class, a student from each group can take turns to scribe on the board, and groups can take turns to dictate the marked words.
Everything we'll highlight, we'll just write in dot points. Okay? And you can start off with your order. So what's the first thing you highlight? Okay. And tell us what happened in the nowadays. What's the next thing you highlight? Okay. Can you tell us how to spell rebellion? Okay. Spell rebellion for us.
R-E-B-W-I-L-L.
Okay, you're in that. That's okay. Okay. That's another one. Alright, so we'll just that's our first one. This is what the whole story's about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's next to it? Can you tell me?
That's our positional
Okay, do you want to do that for me? Another little she's next to me. What does it say?
The government's
We'll leave that, we'll just do government. Because this is how you write notes. So government. The thing about writing a board, you can rub it out and do it. That's it, beautiful.
policies.
Policies.
It's P-O-L-I.
P-O-L-I.
C-I-P-S.
Okay,
R-E-P.
Yeah?
S.
Double S, yes.
O-N.
Beautiful. Repression. Okay, it's the government's policy on repression. That's the next one. Thank you. All right.
Not
So-
finished.
It's not finished.
Break and anger.
Okay, so we didn't do break, just do anger and fear.
Yes.
Just beautiful. Thank you so much. So what's next? So we've got policies of repression, and this one is
First of all,
and what do the policies of reform lead to?
the human rights expectation.
Expectations, okay, expectations.
Of changes. Expectation of changes.
Expectations on...
Changes. Of changes.
Expectations.
Yeah. That's good. Alright. So what's next? Tell us, Millicent. Tell Millicent, we'll go around in a circle and take turns. Okay?
Unable to meet.
Unable to meet. Well, who's unable to meet? Okay, that's good. Government unable to meet. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Lovely. Okay. So the people had these expectations that things were going to change, but the government couldn't meet those expectations. Okay. Tell us, Cynthia, what she's going to be writing.
Okay. Forces of resistance.
Aha, the forces of resistance have started.
Combine.
Combine. CLM.
A major challenge.
That's it? Okay. Alright. Forces of resistance.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll just look at note form. So just the words we followed. So the first one is township. Yeah.
War zone.
Warzone. Yeah. So township is a war zone. That's the first thing. And then we'll make another dot point here.
And if I NC called
ANC pool. Yeah.
Cold.
CALL.
C-A-L-L-E-D. M-I-L-I-C-A-N-T.
Township areas.
And what's next? Okay. And Harley? You spell Harley in the school?
Enter.
And what else?
Environment.
Okay, that's good. That's good. A-S-H? E-S. So when you're telling somebody how to spell, it's good. Yeah, it's good. I'll just give you an idea. It's good if you can do it in bits. You see how, for example, with the word rebellion, I would say this is R-E-B-E-L-L-I-O-N. You see how each word's made up of little bits like that? Instead of things like